Hello everyone, my name's Kate Cooper. I'm Head of Research, Policy and Standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you about managing performers. I'm just sorry, of course, that it wasn't as we'd planned, which would have been at your conference in Stoke-on-Trent on the 30th of March. As I said, I'm from the Institute of Leadership and Management, and as you'd expect, we have a position on what we think makes great leadership. In the centre of that, we have put authenticity, the character of the leader, their trustworthiness, their values, how they're able to live their values, how they use conversation, and importantly, how they listen to what people around them are saying. We expect leaders to have integrity, or that's what our ideal leader, of course, is. We also expect they have a vision, some sort of view of what they think the future should be. And too often, I think our thinking about leadership stops there, and we forget all the other things that are actually vital to great leadership. Leaders have to achieve, they have to deliver results. And often, I think we're so taken in by the personality and the vision that we forget about those very important results. And they are achieved when people own the results that they're making, whether they are successes and failures, and learn from those and take ownership of them. And leaders need to be collaborative. And I think we're seeing that more than anything at the moment, with different collaborations, cooperations that are coming together in order to solve a bigger problem, which of course is the COVID-19 crisis that we're all experiencing. Within our dimensions of leadership, we also have separated them up into what we call components. It's certainly a way of organising the content on our website, but it's also about making leadership learning accessible, so that if you want support in a particular area, you need new knowledge, skills, you know exactly where to go. So achievement has 8 other components as well, but the one I am focusing on today, as already highlighted, is managing performance. We have separated as sort of a further subcomponents, if you like, that whole managing performance into 3 aspects. The performance review is an important part of it, as we all know, and of course they'd be changing radically for people if you're working at home or working in very new and different circumstances. Setting objectives is fundamental, it seems, to any performance management system, and that question, problem, perennial challenge of managing underperformance. Why do leaders need to manage performance? I don't know why I've even really posed that question. In fact, it's so much part of leadership. You can't lead on your own. You do have to do it with other people, and you are judged as a leader by how your collective performs, not how you as an individual. You can't be a great leader in isolation. And as I mentioned, setting objectives seems to be absolutely an intrinsic part of any performance management system, however formal or informal indeed that is. We need to be able to say to people, oh, do you think you could do that? Or that's what our expectation is of you. So they have some sense of direction, you have a sense of shared expectation. And it's once you've set the expectation, which we can call a goal, an objective, a target, we're then able to be in a position to go through that sort of classic cycle of seeing what's going on. And then when things aren't going as expected, which is often, or might I say invariably the case, we can start looking to correct a straightforward control system. But I think now more than ever, if we have performance management systems and we have set objectives for people and we've written them down, aren't they going to be different now? Things are going to have changed quite significantly, and it's having a system, a performance management system, that knows that that's likely to happen. Certainly not as extreme as the circumstances we're in now, but definitely things change. And what you don't want is the objectives become irrelevant and therefore nobody even thinks about them anymore, or to spend a huge amount of time constantly updating them to make sure they're absolutely accurate and spot on. I've included a picture here of Peter Drucker, who was really the father of managing by objectives. And his great vision, if you like, was that if you set objectives at the organizational level and you're clear about what those are, you can then divide them up into departmental objectives. They can then become further divided into team objectives, and eventually individuals know what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And you see from this diagram, it represents this idea that we're all working towards the same big objective, we're just having a smaller piece of that to engage with at an individual, team and departmental level. Even when we look at that now, and I mean, Peter Drucker died earlier this century, that actually how static it looks. And then when you think about the effort that would have to go into getting not only the organisational objectives sort of agreed and written down, set in stone, we then have to tell departments, share them around, and teams and individuals. And by the time you've disseminated, cascaded, whatever it is you like to call it, you've probably got the wrong objective, certainly at the broader organisational level. So there is a role for these objectives, but let's be, I suppose, critical in how we use them. Another area where I think it's a good idea to be critical is thinking about smart objectives. I think too often we think if we set a smart objective, and everybody, I think even school children have heard of smart objectives, we think that somehow that's the job done, because actually it is quite a challenging thing to set a smart objective. And I did see some research recently that suggested that about 14% of smart objectives are actually ever realised. So I think what we have to think about is it's not enough to, oh, we've done that, they're smart, therefore we're somehow miraculously going to do them. That's still only the first part of the process. So maybe we need to be less smart and more thoughtful about what it is we're doing this objective setting for. And one suggestion that comes from somebody called Mark Murphy, I'm not offering this as an alternative, don't do smart, do hard, but it's just another way of looking at it. And the way I particularly like Mark presents objective setting is this idea that they're going to be heartfelt. They have to matter. You have to care about them. And how many smart objectives have we all set for ourselves that we really didn't care about? They weren't from the heart. Because if they are heartfelt, we will get to that animation, that level of activity and action, because it will matter whether or not we achieve them. Yes, they need to be realistic, and Mark advocates that they are difficult. But to me, the standout bit about the hard objective is that starting with the idea that they have to matter, you have to care about them. And it might not be that they fit very easily into, a classic performance management matrix or form. And that, I think, is the challenge for all of us, especially now. We want people to care about their work still, to have different objectives. We might be suggesting smaller ones, just getting through a week's quite an achievement for some people if they're isolated, they're not used to working at home. And I think we've also inclined to think that younger people are going to be okay with this because of their digital capability. I was talking to somebody who's got 3 teenage daughters, and she was saying it's almost business as usual for them in terms of how they communicate with each other with all their various digital technologies, but they are so missing that contact, going to school, talking to people. And if you are used to going to an office environment, it really doesn't matter whether you are young and really good on various ways of using Zoom, house party, whatever it is that you're using to keep in touch, you're still going to miss being in that same physical location as people you care about. So if you are still engaging with a formal performance review, and I'd encourage any sort of performance review, mainly just to keep people knowing that you're interested. And although I've put the classic advice here, I think we've got to adapt and amend this in terms of what's going on. And in a way, it's quite amusing to think that we set these very high standards for a performance review. If you flip that into trying to undertake some sort of review with somebody who's sharing a small home with somebody else who's working, maybe also with children there, dogs, though actually they seem to feature particularly positively and are very, very good for morale, it seems, in all the conference calls I've seen. And you might even have elderly relatives there. So much going on. It's not an office. It's all sorts of things as well as being an office. But if you can say, how's it going? How are you getting on? How do you think you're managing in terms of what you would normally do? It's a great conversation. People will still underperform, and I know this is a time when one has to be very kind. I think is the first place we start from. But keeping businesses going, especially those businesses that can keep going for the next few weeks, is absolutely business critical. And we cannot easily let standards drop because the time's difficult, because the damage on the sustainability of the business is going to be significant. So you might have situations where you still have to talk to people about they're not doing their work well enough. But I think the first place to start is not from why isn't this good enough, is, you know, why are you finding this difficult? What are your particular challenges now? How can I, as your manager of a team, how can I help you be a bit better or put things in place? And I think how we manage our working day is going to be very different. It's different for people anyway about their peak levels of energy. But now with all the other things that might be going on, it's quite acceptable that people will be perhaps working late at night, early in the morning, trying to fit everything in around everything else. So underperformance might well be something that has to be tolerated in a way, but also looked at over a longer period of time than we might normally do so. Because people will have a lack of capability. And I think that the obvious one now is working on your own, working when you're used to an office, working with technology that you're not familiar with. Those of us that just flip quickly to home working when they're used to an office environment won't be that good at it. It's going to take quite a long time to get good at working with people you don't see. And if we had planned for this in advance, any sort of continuity planning that we do, there would have been a significant amount of training, not only about making sure that the technology works, but also making sure we know how to do it. But one of the things I think is going to be particularly challenging for everybody who has staff to manage over the next few weeks is the motivation. We're already hearing accounts from Italy and China about how people started with such great intentions and how quickly they became lethargic and how the time was flying by with very little being achieved. So what I think, looking at this list of all the things that might contribute to motivation, I think what else is going on? And for many people, financial worries, although it's at the bottom of this list, must be really significant. Many things we're not going to be able to fix for people, and that's absolutely the case, but we can always listen to what the problems are. What are the challenges that you're finding at the moment with the work that you're doing for us? How can we help? Is there anything that we can do to help? And where any flexible remote working expert would tell you is when you have a team of people who are not seeing each other, that they must start together and at a very small level, a unit that's 3, 4, 5 people who would normally work together to agree what this new style of working looks like. Do that via a Zoom conversation, do it using video as much as you can. Try not, unless you have no choice, to use conference calls, because if you've got more than 3 people on them, it's very difficult to know who's speaking. And although it's nothing like the cues we give with body language, tone of voice really helpful, but so are facial expressions. So we are helping people quite a bit understanding what we're trying to say if they can see us when we're saying it. At times like this, I think it's unlikely that people are going to be really engaging in misconduct, but of course it will happen, and this isn't going to be forever. We are going to have to think about new ways of working. We'll hopefully get the same people back, and the old problems will either come back. I do think that for some people that this is going to be an opportunity to work differently. And I've already heard people talking about how they're never going to commute again because of how much time it saves. I think ultimately people will start missing that important social aspect of work and how important that is. So when you're talking about performance, I've headed this one under performance here, but do consider about what you're expecting of people. And again, I'll reiterate that point about being kind. Don't give people surprises. Some people want a daily check-in. Some people would consider that being micromanaged. You only know by asking people and knowing the people that you work with, the people that you manage, what is normal for them. Learning keeps being mentioned as a way of not only passing the time, but sort of making us future ready for the new challenges that lie ahead. And there is so much online learning. But I think the way to make that really work is not to get people set off on their own, get people in pairs doing learning together, testing each other. We've got free resources on the Institute website that somebody is interested in what you're doing, because often when you hear about something new, you read something new, you only really make sense of it when you start talking about it to somebody else. So it's those conversations that embed the learning and also keep the energy and the motivation high. Some of us at the Institute have found already that workloads have increased. I think it really depends where you are in the organisation. And it can be that some people are overloaded or the challenges of their home environment are too difficult in order to maintain the sort of productivity that they'd expect in the office. But it could well be that some people recognise or assert that actually we're only really great 3 hours in a day. So if we could find what our great 3 hours were, we could really be incredibly efficient. And those companies that talk about moving to a 4-day week, for example, and claim that they can still retain the same levels of productivity, maybe this is a time that we're able to demonstrate how much more we can do in less time. So when you want somebody to do something better, do ensure, I highlight here the second one, the two-way process, to be able to convey what your expectations are. And at the moment, as always, leaders, managers are under scrutiny. They're being watched by the people who they manage, and you're the role model. So however you're working, however you manage to maintain levels of motivation, professionalism, and all the other things are going to be the benchmark for the rest of your team. Now that is an additional pressure, absolutely. And I think the only way that you can really deal with that pressure is by getting help yourself. Maybe you've got colleagues managing teams, ask your team how you can help them at the least sort of personal cost for you. And be transparent and open about the problems and challenges that everybody's facing. I'm not talking about naming and shaming here, but I am talking about that dialogue, the conversations. How are we going to get through this? How are we going to keep delivering whatever it is that we need to deliver? And how are we going to keep morale up? So overall, a few tips for managing performance. Make the team responsible for the problem, do offer development opportunities, use the review system, I think wisely, but adaptably, if that was a word, for these times that are incredibly challenging. Think about smart objectives, think about whether they're really delivered and are they delivering what you want from them. Keep motivation at the absolute top of your leadership priorities. We do run daily webinars at the Institute. They're free for everybody. Please go on to the www.institutelm.com, log on to the webinars. There's a different theme every week. This week we're looking at being a great colleague. Very tricky when you don't even see people, but something we can all think about. And next week, the theme for the week is getting used to change. So thank you for listening. I hope it's been helpful. And as I say, please do log on to our other webinars that we're holding.